Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name is D3kryptions and I hope you are well. So in my game I currently need to upgrade my narrative version, but it's often a very common question to how I go about doing this, because I have some C++ changes, I have some UI changes, and each time narrative updates I have to upgrade these. And I often get asked, doesn't this take very long? And no, it doesn't, because I've got the process down pretty slim now. So in this tutorial we're going to look at my process for upgrading narrative and how I go about it each version. So let's get started. So narrative itself is a system or a framework you integrate into your game. Frameworks and systems don't often just plug straight in and do everything you need right off the bat. You will have to sometimes make changes for your particular use case. And that's okay, because narrative is built so you can make changes. It does get a little bit annoying when you have to make these changes, so if you can make changes outside of narrative, even better. So the first thing I do whenever I get a new narrative version is I come and straight away back up my project. So here's my project here, my YouTube tutorials v3, and inside the plugins I have my narrative here. If I open this up, you can see my narrative version is 3.31, and I believe the next version is 3.4 or something like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to come and back up my project here, my YouTube tutorials v3. I'm just going to come and make a copy of it, just in the same folder. And while that's going, we can begin downloading the latest update. So however you download your plugins, for me, I'm on Linux, so I use the Epic Asset Manager, and I'm just going to come and download the latest version of narrative. That's all you basically need to do, download it. And now that my latest version is successfully downloaded, I'm going to go and find it, and my backup has already been made as well. Here we go. So in my latest version, let's go and take a look. So I have jumped through all of these folders, but eventually you'll come to the narrative folder. And if I open it up, you can see the latest version is 3.4, so I am indeed one version behind. So that's great, we can automatically jump into this one. So the first thing you need to do is, depending on your operating system, is update the narrative plugin. In the narrative platform allowed list, you need to make sure your operating system is here. So I'm on Linux, and then you might be on Windows or Mac. Just make sure it's all here, but everything. So the next thing is you need a diff tool, something to compare one solution to another. I actually have one installed called Meld here. Meld is a free and open source one you can get. I use it on Windows, Linux, you can get it on Mac. It's a different type of diff tool because it's an entire project diff tool. It's not a single file. Because if you think about narrative source code, this 176 files, if you have to manually go through one by one comparing changes, it's going to take you forever. So once you've got Meld open, I want to check a folder, and in the first one, I'm just going to come and find my YouTube tutorials v3, and I'm going to open up the plugins narrative, and I'm going to go into the source, because you don't need to compare the binaries or the intermediate. They're generated at runtime, so that's fine. The content, it's binary files because it's UAsset files. You're not going to be able to do anything with it anyway. And resources, if a PNG's changed, you don't really need it anyway. So I'm going to go into source, and I'm going to click open. And for the new one, I'm going to go and select the new version of narrative, and I'm going to go into the source, and I'm going to click open. And you'll see when it opens, when I click compare, you'll see all of the files that exist and don't exist. So on the left you can see my old narrative, and on the right you can see the new narrative. So these ones here are crossed out here, basically meaning in the new version these files don't exist anymore, which is perfect. So I can just ignore those, and all I'm going to be doing is anywhere it's blue, I'm going to double click and I'm going to compare the changes across. And if I've made any of these changes, then I'm just going to manually come in and type them in. So looking down here, you can see green is what the old version is trying to add to the new version, so I can ignore these because I'm mainly looking at this. Blue is showing you what the new version has that the old one doesn't. So for example, if we scroll down here, you can see in the new version the NPC actor has been removed, because in the old version it's trying to add it back in because it's blue. So I'm just going to quickly scroll down these, and you can see I'm looking for these green changes here to see what's added in, because that's will be changes I've made, and I know none of these are really my changes, so I can just briefly scroll down here. If you have a list of changes you've made, it does help a lot, but for me, I know I can skip this part. So you can come down and you can see all the different files what you've made changes to. So for me, I know the changes I've made are in this one here. So inside dialog editor mode, just to get it working on my Linux, I have to do the specific lines here. So I'm actually just going to copy these, and I'm going to replace this one here like so. And then you'll see now it says they're both identical, so I can just save and cross it off, and I can come and check all the other files I know I've done this to. So not this one, I can cross this one off as well. I can check the graph editor, so here's another one, so I can just paste it back in like so, and I can just make sure my changes that I've made in C++ are there. If you know you've not made any C++ changes, you can entirely skip this step. However, if you are a coder and wanting to get into coding, I highly recommend doing it anyway, because then you can slowly start to build up a good knowledge of narrative. People often ask, how did I become so good at narrative? And it's literally by doing this. I come up and look around narrative and check out its source code and compare it to what I know. And with that, all of my C++ changes are done. The one thing to make sure of is if you are changing all of the new narrative to the old one, you're just undoing your update, so you don't want to do that. Only drag across the ones you know you need to do. If you do see something like this, where it's greeny yellow on the left side and crossed out on the other side, but you know you need it for some reason, then just drag it across. So that's all the C++ changes. So now let's get into how we compare Unreal. So now that we've made some C++ changes here, we actually need to recompile the plugin. Now there are several ways to do this. If you've got a C++ project, you can just drag it in and it will work. However, I like to just do it outside of it, so I'm in full control of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to open a terminal inside my Unreal installation. So if you find where you've installed Unreal, so for me, I have this pre-compiled 3.2 version, and I'm going to go into Engines, Build, Batch Files, and right here you'll see this Run UAT. You might see a BAT, or you might see an SH, depending if you're on Linux or Mac. So I've already got a tutorial showing you how to compile plugins. However, just really quickly running through it, I'm just going to open a terminal in this location. If you can't open a terminal in that location, open your command prompt, copy the path, and just CD into it. And all I'm going to do is type /run UAT, and then you want to build plugin, and then the plugin will be the location of the new one. So I'm going to come into where my narrative view plugin is here, and I'm going to copy the path to it, and then I'm just going to paste it in like so. So you can see it's got my path to my plugin, and then it's referencing the narrative view plugin. And then for the package, it's asking where to put it, and it's in the same location, so I know that. But you can see on the end, I've included narrative new. Now, a common thing people forget about here is you can't compile a plugin that's already inside the engine. You have to move it out, otherwise it will error. And then just set your target platform. So I'm going to click enter, and after a while, that will run down and it will compile narrative for me. So you can see it's already added the binaries in the intermediate folders. It's compiled the plugin in the first place to make sure it's going to compile. If it doesn't compile, it can't compile it in the new engine. So after a while, that will compile, and you can see my narrative new folder is now appearing as this is running. So we'll be back when it's done. So my narrative has actually just errored in the middle of it, and this is something really unique not a lot of people know about across operating systems, is different compilers, so the Linux C++ compiler versus the many different Windows compilers will sometimes catch errors that others don't. There was a video I saw a few years ago, I'll try to put it on screen if I can find it, where somebody is upgrading Super Mario 64 just by using a newer compiler, and it already makes it more efficient. But newer compilers and different compilers can often catch errors that others don't. So for example, Ruben, who works on narrative, his compiler didn't catch this, whereas my compiler has caught it. I've already reported this bug, and he is fixing it for narrative 3.41. However, here it's saying in this file quest task on line 94, it's got 2 ampersands, which means and 2 pipes, which means or, in the same line, and it doesn't know what to do. So here's the line. It's saying create constant boolean, so a boolean that can't change, called b has auth, and it's saying from replication or owning component and this. Well, in mathematics, you know you have bidmass or bodmass, which is it needs to apply parentheses or brackets around it. So where are the brackets going? Are they going here? So it's saying if it's replication or owning comp and it has authority, or is it saying if it's the owning comp and has authority? I already know that this owning comp here just alone is saying, does this component exist? It's checking if the owner of narrative is an existing one. It's not like glitched out or something. And if it is an existing one, then it's checking if it's got authority. So I know the brackets need to go around this one. So it's saying, is it replicated or does the owning component have authority? And that's what it needs to do. So we actually need to fix this, and it's dead easy to do. You don't need to do this on yours if you're on Windows, because your compiler might just allow it. And if it's completely okay, it will work because it will understand what to do. However, my compiler is a little bit more strict and saying you can't do this. So what I'm going to do is come into my old narrative, this one here, narrative 3.4 here. I'm not going to go into the new folder, and in the source, I'm actually just going to search for quest task.cpp. And here we are. So this, if I open item location, is in narrative private, and it's saying on line 94. So you can see here, there it is. So I'm just going to add my brackets around there and around the end just like that. And now I'm just going to reinitialize the compile to build the plugin again. So let's check again in a minute. And with that, my plugin is compiled. So what I can do is I can come back to my project that I actually want the upgrade to go to, not the backup one. So I'm going to come into here, and I'm going to go into my plugins, and I'm just going to delete narrative out here. And then I'm going to take narrative new, and I'm going to paste it into plugin. And this, by the way, can be applied to any plugin you have. I'm just doing it for narrative because that's the plugin I know the best. And then that's it. So now we can go and open this project. And it should just open up completely unless there's been big plugin changes. Mine took around 3-4 minutes to compile. Obviously, the bigger the plugin, the longer it'll take to compile. The slower your computer, the longer it'll take to compile. You might even compile yours, it takes 30 seconds. And the project is now open. So you can see it's fully usable. Now, depending what changes you've made, if you click play, it may or may not error. And that can be the key. So in my case, I have some UI changes on mine that I'd prefer to keep over. Now, this is the part where if you have a better computer, it's going to be easier. But we need to open 2 versions of Unreal up. One with the new project up, which is this one here. I'm going to place it right here. And the next project we need to open is the old version of our project, the backup one here. And what we're going to do, we're going to compare side by side the changes that we need to go and get. So I'm going to open Unreal up, and in this new one, while Unreal's opening, I'm actually going to come and open my narrative default UI. See, on here, I've removed this little arrow thing here, which is normally what narrative uses to select which text you're on. I don't like it like that. I prefer the much more common one where it's against the actual dialogue and it moves up and down. So that's what we're going to do. I'm just going to come and click browse, and I'm going to find my backup project. Here we go, copy, and I'm just going to open this one up instead. If you've also got multi-monitors, this is helpful. It's not impossible without it, but if you've got multiple monitors, you can have it side by side on the screen. For this tutorial though, I'm going to try and keep it on the same monitor so I can show you how I do it. So now I have my old Unreal project open, and you can see it's compiling shaders because it's never opened this project before. So I'm just going to again come and open my narrative default UI. Now you might be thinking, why don't I just import both UIs to the project and compare it in the same project? And the core reason I don't do that is because a few versions ago in narrative, some parent classes were removed from the UI, and that broke every project that tried to upgrade to it and keep their old UI in. So if you were to just put your old UI in, it would have broke. You couldn't open it at all without those C++ classes existing, which didn't exist because they weren't there. So that's why I now open it into projects so you can compare. So you can see on this one here, I have my arrow, which is my new one, but on my old project, I have a timer and the arrow's not there. So I need to add all this stuff across to the new one. So I'll try to remember to put on screen when I'm looking at the new project and the old project, but you might be able to follow. I don't know, we'll see. But the first thing I can see is on the old project here, I have my PB timed response here, and you could make this timer better by extracting it out of Narrative's UI and then put it on your own HUD, and then maybe it'd work better. However, I want it to be right next to the diagonal lines. It might get tricky from 2 widgets, so that's why I just mod it and put up with this slight change. But overall, doing all of this, it doesn't take long. Within 20 minutes, I can have Narrative back up and running fully updated. Granted, I don't have a huge amount of changes, but it doesn't generally take days and days. So I'm going to come and copy this vertical box here, because I know that's got my 3 changes in it, and the 3 inside of it. I'm going to come back across to my new one, and you can see this vertical box here only has 2 things inside of it, and it has a selector icon above it. I'm actually going to select all of them and delete it off, and I'm just going to paste it in. And you'll see we now have something that roughly resembles the new version of Narrative looks-wise. So I'm just going to save this, and now we can jump into the code and actually start getting it to work. So the first thing I'm going to do is, I know in the new version of Narrative, a bunch of stuff has been removed. So like in quests, all the events have been removed because they've been turned into functions, so it's more organized, which is fine. So I'm going to come into general stuff in my new one, and at the bottom I know I've got some stuff I need to add. In the old version of Narrative, I'm going to come to my graph, I'm going to open my event graph and go to general stuff, and in my old one it's in the quests one for some reason. So on here, I'm just going to copy this timer, and I'm going to come across to the new one, and I'm going to paste it in. There we go. So you'll see some nodes are going to remain grey, and they mean they don't exist, because these are variables I've created in Narrative. Really simply, right click, create variable. Unreal's clever enough to figure out what type you need, and it will put it in. So this one here, you can create as a variable. That's not what I want to do, because this OL is an overlay. That means I've missed something on the UI. So I'm going to come back over to here, and somewhere I have an OL timer right at the bottom here, look. And it's just placed at the side here, and that's where my timers are housed, basically. So I'm going to copy that, and I'm just going to come in and paste it in the base canvas at the bottom. There we go, and it's in the right location. Everything looks good. And now when I come back to the graph, you'll see it's now successfully updated there. So I know I've added some new functions as well. So if I come to the the old one, scroll up, you can see I have player timed response and I have 3 functions here. So all I'm going to do is simply right click, I'm going to copy it, come across to here, and I'm just going to paste inside my functions there. And I'm just going to do this for each function like so. And then clicking back on the first one, I'm just going to roughly go over it and make sure like these variables here I haven't saved. I'm going to save these two like so. And this one again, I've not saved this one, so I'll just save that like so. And the final one. So there's my 4 variables done for that one. I'll check the next one. You can see all this is looking good. There's no grey ones. We have an error here because it's asking for an NPC avatar. And if you remember in the C++, that has now been removed. So I'm just going to remove that and delete this node off because we don't need it. So that's one less thing we have to do in future. And then on the end player task, I'm just going to come across it and this all looks good. So I can compile and save. And you'll see we've already got some errors because I deleted the selector icon, and that's okay because I know I've done that. So this is where we can start coming to clean it up. So on dialog replies available here, I'm going to come and find the same function in my old narrative. So in dialog, it's going to be on dialog replies available. Here we go. So the first thing I do is I actually store all the player dialog options as a variable, and we see narrative doesn't do this. So instead what I'm going to do is just come off and delete this selector icon set visibility, and I'm just going to come and clear the same ones here. So this is why I said 2 monitors would be really easy because you can jump between them so much easier. And I'm going to connect it into here. So if I right click this and do create variable, with any luck, it's automatically assigned the correct type, which is perfect. And then this is all I'm going to do. I'm just going to go across each function that I know I've made changes to, and I'm just going to make sure they're identical. Now I don't want to copy and paste, because if I copy and paste the entire function across, this, for example, the narrative parties update won't exist in mine anymore. So you will have to make slight changes. This is why I say it's better to try and abstract it out as best you can, but it's not always that easy. So we can see dialog player options, anything to do with that I added, so we know that's fine. So I loop through all the player replies here, I create the widget, and right at the end I add it to the dialog player options, so we know we can copy that, and I can add it right at the end here, like so. So there's one I do. I also know on the for each completed, it does all the narrative party stuff. So right at the end of here, I do some extra little bit of code, so I can just make some room. I can paste my code here, which is basically saying, get the first one. If it's valid, then I want to set the selection. If I drag over here, now I don't have a set selection function on here, which means it's a custom one I've added. I'm going to open up this BP dialog option, and I'm going to come and also do the same on my old narrative. And you'll be able to see I've made UI changes and code changes to this as well. So you can see on the UI, I've got a total different horizontal bar, so I'll just copy all of this. I'll come into here, I'll delete the reply text, and I'll paste this new one in like so. Then I'll come to the code, and you can see I have a function in my old narrative called set selection, which basically just toggles the selector icon. So I can come into my old one and just paste it in. Now I can hit compile, and this one should compile all happily like that. And just checking the code, I also have an on hover fix, so I'm just going to come in and paste this in, and all this does is set the player's reply if I hover over it, which is how it toggles the UI changes. But apart from that, I think that's everything I do. So I'll hit compile and save. It's always good to have backups anyway. And then back to the narrative default UI, right at here, I should now be able to go set selection like so, and I can plug this up here. So you need to figure out which one you did. So on mine, I ticked this, so it basically said when you first render all the options, do all the narrative party stuff, and then set the selection like so. If I hit compile, you can see I'm missing one more selector icon down here, and that's on dialog option. So on my old version, let's find this on dialog line selected, which I believe is actually select reply. I believe that it was renamed in the new version. And yes, that's looking very similar. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete off this hidden one here for mine because I don't need it. And then instead of casting to it, I don't any longer need to actually go through the player reply box because I have the dialog options here, which makes it a little bit more efficient. So I can drag this up to here, and I can just delete these bits off one by one and just make sure I plug it into the right location, and I can just delete these off like so. So there we go. So we now have it looping through all the player options, and then it's doing a bunch of stuff it needs to do, and just comparing it to the old version, they are doing the same thing. So I'm actually just going to come and delete these and add mine in like so instead, because I know they do roughly the same thing. And the more you do this, the more you'll learn what changes are there and aren't there. Sometimes you will forget it. It's a given. It will always happen. But after a while, you'll pick it up nicely. So that is mine looking all good. The other thing you can do is you can try and find where variables are actually used. So for example, I know I added this variable of player dialog options. So if I come into my blueprints and press Ctrl-Shift-F and search for it, it will actually tell me everywhere it's used, so I can compare if that is used equally in the new version as well. If I drag this across here and do the same here, the left is my old one, the right is my new one. It's looking, we actually have an extra one on the new version and not the old one. And on the old one, I'm just going to come and double click on each one and just make sure I've done the same. So right here, this this is where we add the events, so we definitely did that one, so I can skip that one. This one here is when we select a reply, we get the first one and mark it as ticked. So I know we've already done this one, so that one's okay. And here we are, here's the last one, set player reply. On mine, there is nothing narrative specific, so I'm just going to come and copy all of the old one, move it to here. Now, I know this tutorial was very, very specific in my case towards the end, but it's showing my process, what I go through every time I update. And it's not massive, and yes, I could abstract some of it out, like I say, but it doesn't take long to do. Granted, if you went and updated all the artwork and everything, in that case, I'd highly recommend you making your own component anyway, which I do have a tutorial coming up soon, so make sure you subscribe for that. I'm just waiting for the new narrative common UI update to drop. And there we go. So now if I compile and save, it should all be up and running. So now if I start the game, and if your computer doesn't crash, so you actually start the project up again, and we click play, and there we go. We now have a project up and running. If I come talk to this chat, you'll see it's all working. I've got my dialogue. Everything's looking good. If I run back over to the other guy where now I've got more comprehensive dialogue, you can see, there we go. So it's now going up and down. It's selecting. If I use my mouse cursor, it is working. However, there is one slight bug that if I come in, you see I've just missed one thing, that it's not selecting the dialogue automatically, the first one. So when I come in and hover it, it works fine. So that's the only thing I've missed, and that's the process I go through. So this video, unedited at the moment, is about 31 minutes long. Edited, it might be 15 something. So it really is pretty quick to get up and running. I do try to abstract as much as I can out of narrative. So if, for example, the timer, I have seriously considered moving it out and just putting it in a more generic place. For quests, that might work fine. For dialogue, it will be a little bit harder to do. So we just need to figure out where it renders dialogue options. And I have a feeling it was this little bit here. So when it comes in, it checks if the owning component is a narrative hearty component. The cast was failing because it wasn't. So all I'm going to do, actually, just to make mine a bit neater, is I'm just going to move all this across. And I'm just going to paste mine at the start, because then I've got so many connections going yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. And then I'll just connect both of these to here. You could spend hours neatening it all. That's fine. That's it. So you can see it now automatically selects the correct one right as soon as you come in to the dialogue. You see straight away it's selected the correct one, which is perfect. So that's my process for upgrading an old version of narrative to a new one. Now, if you're jumping huge versions at a time, you could argue there'd be so many new changes and so many old changes that it might not be worth it. Narrative's incremental versions are generally pretty good for being a small package thing, and if the plugin follows proper version patterns, it typically wouldn't be completely abstract like you're redoing the entire plugin each time. So it's just a case of giving it a try and seeing what happens. An absolute worst case, you'll just have to make the changes one by one like we did. So that's it, ladies and gentlemen. That is how I go about upgrading my plugins every time I go and upgrade it. I don't upgrade every plugin. I always look at what's new in the latest version, and if I'm busy on something, I don't go and upgrade. I'll only do it when I'm free, or in this case plugging a tutorial, when I'm free, or if there's a feature I really want. So for example, this new version of narrative is pretty much the narrative parties update, which is for multiplayer. I'm not going to use that. I don't need it. However, there are some changes that are core in this update which are going to affect future versions, such as all of the events now replaced from events to functions. That's not going to change back. That's going to be an ongoing thing. So I've changed mine over now just so I'm following the curve. And that's it, ladies and gentlemen. Tell me, how do you upgrade? Do you use the blueprint version control comparison? Do you have any other tips to upgrade? Do you need to see anything else? Let me know below. My name is D3kryptions, and I will see you next time.